All right, here we are to read chapter 14 from Pacific Crossing. And here we go. Make sure you have a text so you can follow along, please. The week passed with Lincoln working hard at Kempo. His test was 6 days away, just one day before he and Tony would board a jet and return to San Francisco. Oyama Sensei said that his skill had grown. He was as lean as a cat and fast. He could snap a kick, punch, and hold his own when he sparred with the black belts. So sparring is like practice fighting, in case you're unfamiliar with that term. But his intense drills were not without pain. A bruise the color of an eggplant showed up on his shoulder. A toenail broke off, and a wiggle of blood splashed the grass as he jumped about on one leg in pain. Yeah, that hurts. Okay. The middle finger on his left hand was hurt, and he strained his neck trying to break a chokehold. For 2 days, he walked around like Frankenstein, unable to move his neck, and slept sitting up because it hurt when he lay down. The days passed, the crops were in, and now Lincoln and Mitsu were selling them in front of the house. They ate some of the vegetables, but mostly they haggled over the prices with housewives who were tough customers. So just a side note, so to haggle, right, you're trying to create the best deal. This happens a lot in a type of like bartering system, or where if you go to like a farmer's market and let's say that the fruit is, $3 for 3 avocados. And let's say you buy 4 and you're like, can I have 4 for 3? Sometimes they'll give it to you. Sometimes no, they want as much money as they can get. But it doesn't hurt to ask. All right. One evening, Mr. Ono returned from work and announced, I have a test for you boys. He sucked long and hard on a soda. They were lying down in the shade of the porch, exhausted from the heat of the day. The flies were thick as smoke, now that some of the vegetables were spoiling. Mitsu looked up and asked, a test? Yes, a test. To see how fast you are. And if you're good listeners. The boys sat up. They were curious. They slapped the flies from their toes and listened to Mitsu's father explain that he had a hidden note in Tokyo and that they were to fetch it for him. Okay. He said that they would take a train and that they would have to find the note, read it, and follow its instructions. They had to do this in 1 day and be home before he returned from work. Their reward would be a visit to the country with the boys driving. Tokyo was 150 miles away from their own town. The distance wasn't a problem. They would ride a bullet train. The problem was finding their way around Tokyo and through the hordes of workers. The problem was also getting back on time. But the boys were excited. They punched each other in the stomach. Mitsu swung a cupped hand at a fly and swatted the poor creature against the porch. The hurt fly buzzed in a circle, whirling its crushed wings. I've never been to Tokyo, Lincoln said, except the time you picked me up at the airport. I've been there plenty of times, but never alone. What if we miss our connections back? Mitsu asked, somewhat worried. Mr. Ono lit a cigarette. He inhaled, let out a stream of smoke from his mouth, and said, eyeing Lincoln, how do you say the American phrase, that's too bad? Mr. Ono laughed until he coughed. Lincoln and Mitsu laughed and jumped up and down, wild at the thought of going to Tokyo by themselves. What does this note look like? Mitsu asked. A note folded into a boat, Mr. Ono replied like a prophet. Just a note? A paper boat? Lincoln asked. That's it. Just a piece of paper. In a fern in the Sumitomo building in the Shinjuku district. Mr. Ono crushed his cigarette and started to leave when Mitsu asked him about the building, and he waved them off. Enough clues. We'll see how smart you two are. Mitsu knew the Sumitomo building, a high rise with 52 floors, and he knew the Shinjuku district. It was where there were small bars and restaurants, a hangout for young students and office workers. This is going to be fun, Lincoln said. I guess so, Mitsu muttered, lost in thought. The fly that he had swatted was now washing its face, apparently okay. A paper boat in a fern? My dad's a character. The next morning they woke before daybreak. They dressed quickly and ate a handful of rice balls on the run. At 6:45, they arrived at the train station where Mr. Ono worked as a mechanic. The bullet train was due to leave at 7:10. It was a late train that would stop only twice to pick up commuters. Where are our tickets? Mitsu asked. You get no tickets. You boys get to ride with the mail and chickens. You mean in the back? Mitsu asked. I like it, Lincoln said, beaming. He had been on trains 3 times, but never in the mail compartment. But we won't be able to look out. Good, then you can close your eyes and go to sleep. Mr. Ono scooted the boys to the cargo car. He slid open the door to a mountain of bagged mail and stacks of newspapers. Welcome to your new home, he chuckled. He gave the boys 3,000 yen and handed them return tickets, warning them if they lost these, then they would have to stay in Tokyo for good. They would have to work as dishwashers to get the money to come back. This is very serious. Mitsu hopped onto the train and Lincoln followed. Mr. Ono gave the boys a stiff salute and closed the door. Within minutes, the train started slowly at first, but then picking up speed until it jerked along at 110 miles an hour. So in Japan, they do have these things called bullet trains, and they go very, very fast. It's very unique to Japan. A small overhead light went on after the door was closed. The boys got comfortable and sat on the bags, then opened one of them. They pulled out comic books, and Lincoln liked the pictures of Japanese superheroes, all with cuts of muscle that would put Olympic athletes to shame. For a second, they thought of opening a package. They thought it was food. But they also knew it was a crime to open someone else's mail, and they were scared of being arrested. So in the United States, it is a federal crime, federal felony, to open up someone else's mail. Like, big trouble, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, big trouble. So they only sniffed the package, Lincoln guessing that it held plums and Mitsu guessing dried fish. Those are 2 very different smells. So it's very interesting. There was a small, greasy window high in the corner. Lincoln stacked a couple of mail bags against the wall and climbed up to the window. He stared out, at farmland broken up with smoke. In the distance, he could see a mountain dotted with remnants of snow. And snow was what Lincoln was thinking about. The cargo car was heating up. The air grew thick and wet. The boys were sweating and dry-mouthed. Lincoln pulled a stick of gum out of his pocket and tore it in half to share. What do you think your father's hiding? Lincoln asked, unbuttoning the front of his shirt. Probably money. He likes to give money away. I wish my mom was generous with money, Lincoln recalled being caught going through her coin purse. He recalled the race around the living room and her yelling, "You little thief!" Little did she know that he had been pinching $1.20 for a Mother's Day gift. When the train pulled into Tokyo, they opened the cargo door and peeked out, scared that somebody might scold them for going baggage. There were enough witnesses, thousands of commuters hurrying to work. We could jump and run, Lincoln suggested. Why not? Mitsu agreed, counting. Ichi, san, shi, go. They dropped to the platform, arms out like wings, and a security guard turned when he heard their grunting fall. He shouted at them to stay, but the boys took off. The guard ran after them, weaving in and out of the crowd, but Lincoln and Mitsu were too lean, too quick, too full of fear to let themselves get caught. They ran a half-mile, stopped, and sat on a curb where a pigeon with a crooked beak was drinking from a small, oily puddle. Let's get a Coke, Mitsu suggested, breathing hard. It was 9:30, and already the asphalt was wavering with the summer heat. Good idea, Lincoln said. They bought sodas at a newsstand and drank slowly while looking at comic books. Finished, Mitsu asked the cashier about the Sumitomo building. The cashier waved his hand, muttered in guttural Japanese, and shook his head at the boys for reading his comic books without buying one. Oh no, Mitsu groaned. We got off at the wrong stop. It's on the other side of the city. The other side? What should we do? Take a bus, Mitsu suggested. Let's go. They boarded a bus, but it was going in the wrong direction. And they ended up traveling 6 blocks farther away from the Sumitomo building. The ride cost them 20 minutes and 2 tokens. How come you didn't tell us? Mitsu yelled at the driver in Japanese. The bus driver yelled at Mitsu, telling him to get off the bus. Mitsu answered back, and the bus driver picked up the telephone to call his station. What a slime ball, Lincoln muttered under his breath. He wanted to drop the driver, but he knew better. The boys started to get off the bus, but the driver cut the engine. The door wouldn't open. The air conditioning groaned to a stop. All exits were blocked. The driver got out of his seat with an ugly sneer. Lincoln spotted 2 policemen trying to cross against the traffic to their side of the street. They were wearing white gloves and looked very clean in spite of the heat, and very determined. Push, Mitsu. La policia, Lincoln yelled. Lincoln and Mitsu heave-hoed, and the door sighed open just as the bus driver grabbed Mitsu's sleeve. Without thinking, Lincoln used a Kempo technique to free Mitsu, hitting a pressure point in the bus driver's forearm. The bus driver screamed in pain and dropped to his knees. Now I did it, Lincoln said. Andale, Mitsu. They darted from the bus, kicking their legs high and pumping their arms. When they looked back, the 2 cops were only a block behind. Lincoln and Mitsu turned on the juice, their lungs sucking in Tokyo's heat. The boys ducked into a subway and leaped onto a train that carried them, along with their worry, nearly to the Sumitomo building. Once they left the subway and were at street level, the heat blasted them like a furnace. The sharp sunlight hurt their eyes. Mitsu asked for directions from a woman selling flowers under a striped awning. The roses seemed to gasp for air, and the daisies were hanging their heads, exhausted. She pointed to a nearby building, an unusual triangular building tall enough to block out the sun. On their way, the boys were ever watchful for police in blue uniforms. They seemed to be everywhere, directing traffic at clogged intersections, standing before storefronts, peeking into alleys, and scolding kids crossing the street against red lights. When Lincoln and Mitsu stopped to buy another soda, they turned to look directly into the policeman's eyes, and he seemed to know that Lincoln was a criminal, an American kid with brown skin who had pushed open a door to avoid an irate bus driver and then dropped him with a painful strike at a pressure point. A lump of fear and some soda washed down Lincoln's throat when the policeman turned and walked away. Here we are, Mitsu said. They started to enter the lobby, but quickly backed out when a security guard looked at them hard. The building was all business, not a place for kids in sneakers, and especially not for teenagers who were going to rake their hands through the planter looking for a piece of folded paper into a boat. This is going to be difficult, Mitsu said, looking back into the lobby. He spied 4 planters near the elevators. Yeah, how do we get in there? I got it, Mitsu said. We just look like we belong to one of the people going in. They turned and watched people entering the revolving doors. Businessmen in heat-crumpled suits, office workers, and delivery people. There, Mitsu said, pointing to an older woman to follow her in. Mitsu and Lincoln skipped into step behind the woman. Once they were in the lobby, Mitsu struck up a conversation in rapid Japanese with her. He babbled on and on so that the security guard would not become suspicious. But he talked so much, so loudly, that the security guard looked over at them. Mitsu asked the woman about the fern in the nearest planter. She walked over to the fern and looked at it, puzzled. Then she looked at the boys. While she responded to Mitsu's question, Mitsu and Lincoln casually raked their hands over the soil. Nothing. Mitsu asked her about another fern, but she just gave him an odd look and started walking towards the elevator. Lincoln glanced at the security guard who was tying his shoe and studying the three of them. Mitsu and Lincoln gave up on creating a distraction and just rushed to the next fern. They plowed the earth with their fingers, coming up with leaves, rocks, and small pebbles, but no white paper boat. Mitsu looked up to see the security guard walking towards them. "Let's check the planter over there," Mitsu said. They rushed over, raked the dirt, and searched among the leaves. The guard was now hovering above them. Just as he started to question them, Lincoln parted a fan of leaves and screamed, "I got it!" He was staring at a piece of soggy paper shaped more like a hat than a boat. He snatched it, and as they backed away from the guard, they darted for the exit, Lincoln first, with Mitsu at his heels. The heat struck them as they raced away, the guard behind them blowing his whistle and shouting for them to stop. Two cops eating ramen at a stand-up eatery at the corner looked, but didn't join the chase. The boys ran 3 blocks, then stopped in an alley to catch their breath. Their shirts were soaked. The guard had been left far behind. Mitsu unfolded the piece of paper to find only an amateurish drawing of a clown. He turned it over, at first baffled, then as mad as a cat dunked in water. There was nothing on the paper except the clown with 3 large teeth. "What kind of joke is this?" Lincoln asked. Mitsu tossed the piece of paper away, which appeared to laugh at them as it fell to the ground. "My father is a joker." As they started down the street, they were spotted by the 2 policemen who had been eating ramen outside of Sumitomo Building. One pointed and shouted at them. "Like hell," Lincoln said, fist doubles. "Like hell," Mitsu mimicked. "In your face." They outran the policemen and made their way to the subway that would take them to the train station. It was 2:45, or 2:45. The train ride would take an hour and a half, which would bring them back to Atami 2 hours before Mitsu's father would get home from work. They would be glad to get out of Tokyo. The place was too dangerous, and they were exhausted. They boarded the train, this time in the passenger section, and fell asleep 10 minutes after it pulled out of the station. At home, Mr. Ono was already on the Ingawa nursing an iced tea. He had come home from work 2 hours early so that he would be sure to beat the boys. "You 2 clowns look tired," he said as he rested his iced tea on his stomach. "That was a terrible joke," Mitsu yelled as he closed the gate behind him. "A clown face? A clown face? What are you talking about?" Mr. Ono asked innocently. He fanned himself with a newspaper, holding back laughter. "You know," they both yelled. They threw themselves down the steps. Their necks were sunburned and their heads hurt from too much sun. "There must be a mistake. You did not find my little note." A wave of laughter broke from his throat. The iced tea jiggled and spilled on his stomach. They ate dinner, and when the evening cooled, Mitsu's father suggested that they go for a ride. 3 miles outside of town, he pulled over and said, "You first, Mitsu. Drive me around." The boys were excited. Mitsu started the car, revving the engine so that blue smoke stank up the air. He put the car into gear, and outside of town, out of view of his mother and Lincoln's mother and the police, they drove over the country road, utterly happy that they were 14.